Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I grew up in a suburb of a medium-sized city. Behind my house was a sprawling forest reserve, and winding through it was a network of trails. I had roamed these trails since childhood, and by the time I was a teenager, I knew the twists and turns like the back of my hand. During the summer before college, I had made it a routine to jog these trails in the evenings. The thick canopies, chirping birds, and that earthy smell made the experience therapeutic. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, I laced up my sneakers and headed out. About 20 minutes into my jog, I reached a clearing that overlooked a creek. I often paused here to take in the view, but that day, something was off. I saw a man standing on the other side of the creek. He was middle-aged, wearing a tattered brown jacket despite the summer heat, and he was staring straight at me. I offered a tentative wave, thinking maybe he was lost, but he didn't wave back. Instead, his stare intensified. Unsettled, I resumed my jog, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. Soon, I approached the old wooden bridge that would loop me back towards home. As I reached the midpoint of the bridge, I heard footsteps. They weren't the rhythmic patter of a jogger, they were deliberate and heavy. My heart rate quickened, and I glanced back. It was the man from the clearing. He was walking towards me, maintaining the unsettling eye contact. There was something predatory in his gaze, like a cat tracking its prey. Panic surged through me, and I broke into a sprint. I didn't dare look back, but his footsteps grew louder, faster. I veered off the main trail, hoping the rugged terrain would slow him down. The forest had transformed. The once familiar trails now seemed alien, and shadows played tricks on my eyes. Light breath came in ragged gasps, but fear propelled me forward. Every rustle, every snapped twig sent a fresh wave of adrenaline pumping. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, I stumbled upon a densely wooded area and, driven by sheer desperation, decided to hide. I crouched behind a fallen log, covering my mouth to muffle my breathing. The footsteps grew near, then paused. Silence, save for the distant hoot of an owl. Then, a voice, low and raspy, called out, "I just want to talk." The voice was chilling, drippy with malice. Minutes dragged on, but it felt like hours. Finally, the footsteps receded. I waited, listening intently, ensuring he was far enough away. Then, using my phone's flashlight, I began my trek home, avoiding the trails and staying in the shadows. Emerging from the forest, the sight of my house was overwhelming. I sprinted the rest of the way, locking the door behind me. My parents, alerted by the commotion, listened in horror as I recounted the events. The police were called and they searched the trails, but the man was never found. For days, I was paralyzed with fear, jumping at the smallest of noises. The trails, once a place of solace, were now tainted with the memory of that evening. I couldn't shake off the image of the man, his cold eyes tracking my every move. The incident was the talk of the town. Neighbors installed security cameras, evening strolls were now done in groups, and parents kept a closer eye on their children. The community was on edge. 2 weeks later, a break came. An old shed deep in the forest, which had been abandoned for years, caught fire. The cause was arson, and the charred remains. The police found scraps of clothing, canned food, and disturbingly, pictures. Pictures of various residents, taken from a distance, their every move documented. Among them were photos of me captured during my mini jogs. The realization sent shivers down my spine. He had been watching, stalking, and I had been oblivious. Despite their best efforts, the police never identified the man. With no leads, the case went cold. The forest trails lost their charm for many after that. I left for college, the memories of that day gradually fading but never truly disappearing. The city, with its bright lights and constant hum, provided a welcome distraction. Years later, I returned home for a family reunion. The house, the backyard, and the trails all seemed smaller, less intimidating. Life after the reunion was different. I had returned to the city, my haven of skyscrapers and relentless noise, but Mia's words echoed in my mind, conjuring images of the man I'd hoped to forget. I felt an obligation to do something. If this man was still lurking, then other innocent residents were at risk, and my family, particularly Mia, were in danger. So I started to dig, determined to find a solution to this lingering threat. With some persuasion, I managed to get my hands on the initial police reports and the photographs found in the burn shed. The photos were disconcerting, candid shots of unsuspecting residents taken during their most private moments. Scanning through the stack, I noticed a pattern. Several of the photos were taken from a vantage point that I recognized, a cliff that overlooked a significant portion of the trail. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to revisit the trail. This time, I wasn't alone. I enlisted the help of a couple of friends from my self-defense class. We strategized, setting up camp at various points to monitor any suspicious activities. days. Days turned into nights and back into days. We saw hikers, joggers, families picnicking, but no man in a tattered brown jacket. Then, on the 5th night, as I was perched on the cliff with binoculars, I saw him. Just as before, he stood eerily still, watching the trail from the shadows, his piercing eyes scanning the area. Before he could disappear, I snapped a few photos of him and sent them to my friends stationed nearby. Within minutes, they were on the move, converging on his location. But he was fast. By the time they reached the spot, he was gone. However, we now had photographic evidence of his existence, and more importantly, of his face. We handed the photos to the police. Using facial recognition, they finally identified him. The man's name was Leonard Dobbs, a former resident of the town with a history of stalking and harassment. He had disappeared years ago, and his whereabouts have remained unknown until now. The police launched a manhunt, using our photos and the intel we provided. Within a week, they located his hideout, a small makeshift hut hidden deep within the forest, its interiors adorned with more disturbing photos, and tools that suggested malicious intent. Leonard was apprehended in a neighboring town, attempting to flee. The community was notified, and relief washed over everyone. Thanks to collective efforts and determination, a lurking danger had been neutralized. Leah, now more curious than fearful, often questioned me about that week, eager to understand the details of our adventure. I, however, always steered the conversation away, wanting to shield her from the darker realities for just a bit longer. One thing was clear, though. My bond with the forest had changed forever. The trails, once a source of peace, now served as a constant reminder of vigilance. They had taught me that sometimes, beneath the beauty and calm, dangers lurk, unseen, waiting. To Leonard Dobbs, may you get the help you so desperately need, but more importantly, let's never meet again. The dead of night has a strange quality to it. The stillness, the shadows, and the eerie silence amplify the smallest of sounds. My story revolves around one such quiet night that quickly turned into the most unsettling experience of my life. I had moved to a small apartment on the outskirts of town for work. The building, although old, was surrounded by tall pine trees that often swayed melodiously with the wind. The neighbors were mostly older folks who went to bed early, so nights were generally quiet. The town itself had a low crime rate, and I felt relatively safe. One Thursday night, after finishing a series binge, I crawled into bed, ready to embrace sleep. Just as I was drifting off, my phone rang. The jarring ringtone in the dead of the night startled me. Checking the screen, I noticed an unfamiliar local number. It was past midnight, and I wasn't expecting any calls. Hesitant, I answered, "Hello." There was a brief silence, and then a man's voice, gravelly and cold, said, "You look peaceful when you sleep." The line went dead immediately after. The chill ran down my spine. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and all the windows were shut. How could someone possibly see me? I checked all the locks, turned on all the lights, and peeked through the blinds. The street below was deserted. Thinking it was perhaps a wrong number or a twisted prank, I tried to shake off the unease and went back to bed. But sleep was elusive. 30 minutes later, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. Against my better judgment, I picked it up. This time the voice was almost a whisper. "Why did you turn on the lights?" Panic surged through me. Whoever this was, he was watching me. I dialed 911 immediately, explaining the situation. The operator was called and advised me to stay on the line. She told me officers were on their way. As I waited, the phone rang 2 more times. Each time, the man made comments about my actions, about how I checked the front door, how I peered through the blinds, how I was sitting on the couch clutching my phone. It was as if he had eyes everywhere. The police arrived quickly. They searched the premises, checked every nook and corner around the building, and even scoured the nearby woods. But they found no one. They said it might have been someone with a twisted sense of humor, but they'd patrol the area just to be safe. Feeling a bit reassured but still on edge, I decided to crash at a friend's place for the night. I didn't want to be alone. The next day, I took stock of my apartment, trying to figure out how someone could have watched me. That's when I noticed something odd. A tiny, almost imperceptible, black dot on my bedroom ceiling. On closer inspection, it turned out to be a miniature camera. Horrified, I called the police again. They descended on my apartment and discovered a total of 5 hidden cameras in the bedroom, living room, bathroom, kitchen, and hallway. Each camera was actively transmitting. The subsequent investigation revealed that the cameras were being remotely accessed. With some tech magic, the police traced the feed to a house located a few streets away. When they raided the place, they found an elaborate setup of monitors, and more disturbingly, a treasure trove of footage, not just of me but of previous tenants as well. The occupant of the house, an unassuming man in his 50s named Edgar, was arrested. Turns out, he was the previous owner of my building. He had installed the cameras years ago and had been spying on various tenants, enjoying the perverse thrill of watching unsuspecting victims and on occasion, making those chilling calls. The discovery shook me to my core. My home, my sanctuary, had been violated. Every moment, every intimate detail of my life had been observed by a stranger's prying eyes. The aftermath was a blur of police interviews, therapy sessions, and sleepless nights. I moved out of the apartment shortly after, needing a fresh start. The building was swept for more devices, and the current owner, just as horrified as the tenants, ramped up the security. Edgar was tried and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. It was discovered that he had a history of stalking and had been escalating his activities over the years. My life shifted dramatically after the Edgar incident. I no longer took things at face value. Friends and family noticed the change in me. I was more vigilant and often double-checked things. My apartment was now a fortress with the latest security systems in place. Months turned into years, and while the immediate anxiety of the situation faded, its undercurrent remained. I often caught myself scanning rooms for any unusual signs or watching strangers with more suspicion than warranted. Things took a brighter turn when I met Alex. He was understanding, kind, and had a calming presence. He became my anchor. We met through mutual friends, and after hearing my story, he made it his mission to make me feel safe again. We eventually moved in together, and with him by my side, my anxiety slowly ebbed away. One evening, as we were enjoying dinner at a quaint little restaurant, I noticed a man sitting at the bar, casting glances our way. His eyes, cold and detached, bore into mine, and a shiver ran down my spine. It was a look I'd come to recognize, one of obsession. As the night wore on, his gazes became more frequent, more lingering. I mentioned it to Alex, and he tried to dismiss it as paranoia. But when he finally took a good look at the man, even he felt an unsettling vibe. We decided to leave early. As we headed out, Alex whispered that the man was following us. We quickened our pace, desperately hailing a cab. Just when we thought we had lost him, he appeared right beside our cab at a traffic light, staring intently through the window. His message was clear: I can get to you whenever I want. Terrified, we went straight to the police. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much based on a single night's events. They asked us to keep a record of any further incidents, and they be more. The man seemed to be everywhere. We'd find him at our favorite coffee shop, near Alex's office, even at the park where we walked our dog. He never approached us, never spoke, he just watched. We hired a private investigator, hoping to glean some insight into who he was and what he wanted. The results were shocking. The man, named Kevin, was Edgar's younger brother. He believed that my testimony was the sole reason for Edgar's imprisonment and had harbored a vendetta against me. Confrontation seemed inevitable. We decided to take matters into our own hands, arranging a meeting with Kevin at a public place. Alex and I, accompanied by a couple of friends, faced him. We demanded answers, hoping to end this torment once and for all. Kevin, in his twisted way, believed he was avenging his brother's unfair treatment. He thought that by instilling fear in me, he'd somehow balance the scales. It was heartbreaking and horrifying to see the depth of his delusion. Our pleas, our attempts to reason with him, seemed to fall on deaf ears. We left the meeting with a heavy heart, more fearful than before. Thankfully, our pi had recorded the entire conversation. We handed the evidence to the police, and coupled with our documented encounters, it was enough to get a restraining order against Kevin. With the law on our side, Kevin's appearances dwindled, but the experience was a scalding reminder of the scars I bore from my past encounter. With time, Alex and I moved cities, seeking a fresh start away from haunting memories. Now, years later, we live a peaceful life. We're cautious, but we've also found happiness, love, and a semblance of normalcy. The experience has taught us the value of trust, the strength of unity, and the importance of always being vigilant. To Kevin, lost in his vendetta and delusions, I genuinely hope you find peace. But for our sakes, let's never meet again. When I was 21, I moved into a small rental house in a fairly older neighborhood. The houses were close together, and most of my neighbors were elderly. It was a quiet, picturesque street, marred only by one thing: the house next to mine was vacant. The empty house was a looming, two-story structure. Its windows were dark and gave off a haunting vibe. The paint was peeling, the lawn was overgrown, and it looked like it hadn't been lived in for years. About a month after I moved in, I noticed something odd. Late at night, I would hear faint noises coming from that house, sounds like footsteps, doors creaking, and even low murmurs. It was easy to dismiss it as the sounds an old house makes, or perhaps animals that had made their home there. One evening, as I was doing dishes, I looked out of my kitchen window, which directly faced the empty house's backyard. I froze. There, in the dim twilight, I saw a silhouette of a man. He seemed a bit digga. I quickly turned off my lights and watched. After about 15 minutes, he stopped, looked around, and went back into the house. Disturbed, I decided to share my observations with Mrs. Thompson, an elderly lady who lived on the other side of the empty house. house. Over a cup of tea, she told me that the house had been vacant for almost a decade after the previous owner, an old widow, passed away. She had no family, and the house went to the state. Mrs. Thompson also mentioned that lately she'd noticed a man going in and out of the house, but she assumed he was from the bank or a realtor. Armed with this information, I contacted the local police. They did a quick search of the property but found nothing. They suggested it might have been a homeless person or kids playing a prank. They did, however, promise to increase patrols in the area. A week later, around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud crashing sound coming from the empty house. I peeked through my curtains and saw lights flashing inside the house, moving from room to room. Then, the front door opened and a man stepped out. He was not alone, and with him was a young woman, her hands tied and a cloth gagging her mouth. She was struggling. Panicking, I dialed 911. The police arrived within minutes. Turns out, the man was a wanted felon, and he had been hiding out in the empty house, thinking it would be the perfect spot since the neighborhood was mostly elderly residents who kept to themselves. The girl he had with him was a local college student who had gone missing a week ago. The empty house, which once seemed like nothing more than a neighborhood eyesore, had been hiding a sinister secret. The authorities later discovered that the man had turned the basement of the house into a makeshift prison where he held the girl captive. The neighborhood was in shock. Many of my neighbors, especially the elderly ones, said they had often dismissed the noises from the house as mere creaks of an old structure or the sounds of stray animals. The realization that those noises were signs of something far more malicious happening right next door was deeply unsettling. As for me, I decided to move out. The memories of what transpired next door and the guilt of not realizing sooner were too much. Before I left, the community rallied together to petition the local government to do something about the empty house. The city eventually decided to tear it down, and in its place now stands a small community park. After the incident, I tried my best to return to a semblance of normalcy. I found a new place across town, in a bustling neighborhood where houses sat close and families were aplenty. It felt comforting, being surrounded by the sounds of kids playing in the streets and neighbors greeting each other. Every once in a while, when my mind drifted, memories of that night would flood back. I couldn't help but think of the young woman who had been trapped in that house. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned her name was Maya. She was undergoing therapy and was surrounded by a supportive family helping her navigate the aftermath of her ordeal. I mustered the courage and reached out to Maya. It felt right, like a loose end that needed tying. We met at a local coffee shop. As I walked in, I recognized her immediately. There she was, with the same dark hair and eyes filled with a resilience that spoke volumes. We exchanged an understanding nod and began our conversation. Maya was incredibly gracious. She thanked me for the role I played in her rescue. As we spoke, I realized we had a lot in common. Both of us were trying to rebuild our lives and find healing. Our meetups became regular, shifting from the coffee shop to walks in the park, then to movie nights. Over time, our bond strengthened. We found solace in each other's company, often talking about our dreams, aspirations, and the things that made us laugh. The shared trauma had brought us together, but our newfound friendship was built on mutual respect and understanding. One day, Maya suggested we visit the community park that now stood where the empty house once was. I hesitated initially, but eventually agreed. We sat there on a bench, looking at children playing and families picnicking. Maya turned to me, her eyes shimmery with tears. This park, she said, is a testament to the fact that darkness can be turned into light. We decided to do something constructive with our shared experience. With the help of some local organizations, we started a community outreach program aimed at educating neighborhoods about the importance of staying vigilant and being aware of their surroundings. We organized workshops, brought in experts to provide safety tips, and created a helpline for people to report suspicious activities. Our efforts garnered attention from local media. Stories were written about the transformation of the empty house, Maya's recovery, and our unique friendship. But most importantly, it helped spread the message of community safety and the importance of looking out for one another. Years passed, and life took us in different directions. Maya pursued her studies in psychology, wanting to help others the way she was helped. I moved to a different city for a job opportunity, but our friendship remained intact. Every year, on the anniversary of that fateful night, Maya and I would meet at the community park. We'd sit on our usual bench, reminiscing and catching up. It was our way of reclaiming the narrative, of reminding ourselves that though life could be unpredictable and at times terrifying, there's always a way to find hope and healing. In sharing our story, we hope to inspire others to always be aware, to trust their instincts, and to know that even in the darkest times, there's a possibility of light. It all began with a whim to travel the beautiful hiking trails of Oregon. As an avid hiker, the idea of spending my summer break on a solo backpacking trip was nothing short of thrilling. Most of my friends thought I was mad, but I always found solace in the arms of nature. My second week into the trip, I found myself heading towards the Whispery Pines Trail, a challenging 20-mile stretch famous for its breathtaking views. Checking my map and ensuring my supplies were in order, I began my hike early in the morning, hoping to set camp by a serene spot before nightfall. By evening, the woods grew dense, and the comforting sounds of chirping birds were replaced by eerie silences, occasionally broken by the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig. I stumbled upon a small clearing near a stream and decided it was a good spot to camp. As the darkness enveloped the forest, I lit a fire, cooked a simple meal, and leaned back, enjoying the solitude. That's when I noticed a faint light in the distance, seemingly from another campfire. Must be another backpacker, I thought, not giving it much significance. A couple of hours later, just as I was about to crawl into my tent, I heard a voice calling out, "Ted, is someone there?" It sounded distressed, alarmed. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it in the direction of the voice. There, almost stumbling over the rough terrain, was a man, probably in his late 30s, looking disheveled and frightened. "Hey," he panted as he approached. "I got lost. My group was somewhere down south, and I wandered off. And I shared our campsite for the night. Something felt off." His story didn't quite align with the fact that I hadn't seen any signs of another group during my hike. Plus, his backpack looked almost empty, not something you'd expect from a backpacker. "Sure," I replied cautiously, trying to mask my apprehension. "You can pitch your tent right there." We sat by the fire, and I noticed him sneaking glances at me, his gaze lingering just a bit too long. Every question I asked about his journey was met with vague responses or flat-out deflection. By midnight, a thick fog rolled in, and visibility dropped drastically. My unwanted companion had pitched his tent and was seemingly asleep. I retired to my tent, ensuring my knife was within arm's reach. Hours later, a rustling sound woke me up. I strained my ears and realized it was coming from outside. The sound grew louder, closer. Suddenly, my tent's zipper began to inch open slowly. Heart pounding, I gripped my knife and waited. The silhouette of a hand appeared, reaching inside. In a split-second decision, I slashed at it. A scream pierced the night. "What the hell, man?" the stranger yelled, cradling his injured hand. "Don't come near me." I shouted back, exiting my tent with my flashlight and knife in hand. But the fog was dense, and all I could make out was the sound of his pained breathing. After what felt like hours, the first light of dawn began to pierce the fog. The eerie silence was broken by the sound of footsteps, several of them. I panicked, thinking the stranger had brought reinforcements. A voice boomed, "This is the police. Stay where you are." Relief washed over me. I later learned that the stranger was a fugitive on the run. A group of backpackers had spotted him acting suspiciously and informed the park rangers, who in turn contacted the police. They had been combing the forest the entire night. If it weren't for my instinctual slash in the dark, things might have ended very differently for me. The incident gave me a renewed appreciation for trusting my gut and the importance of safety precautions, even in the serene embrace of nature. The days following the incident were a whirlwind. I had given my statement to the police, and they had asked me to stay in the vicinity in case they needed any further information. The man I had encountered was wanted for a string of burglaries across state lines. They believed he'd been hiding in the forest to evade capture. My encounter with him had been pure bad luck. News spread fast. I was approached by local media outlets looking for the backpacker who faced off with the forest fugitive. Reluctantly, I shared my story, emphasizing the importance of being prepared and always listening to one's intuition. The attention was overwhelming, and I decided to lay low for a while. I booked a room at a nearby lodge. The owners, an elderly couple named Clara and George, had seen my story on the news and insisted on giving me a discount. They treated me like family, and their kindness was a welcome respite from the ordeal I had experienced. Clara, with her soft-spoken voice and stories of the past, had grown up in the area and knew the forest like the back of her hand. She'd tell tales of her adventures as a young girl, of lost travelers she'd helped, and of the ever-changing landscape of the woods. I found solace in her tales, and they helped distract me from the events that had unfolded. One evening, as we sat on the lodge's porch overlooking the dense canopy of trees, Clara said, "You know, nature has a way of teaching us lessons, but it also has a way of healing us." I pondered her words. She was right. Despite the scare, the forest still beckoned me. Its beauty, its mysteries, its challenges, they were all still there, waiting to be embraced. George, sensing my restlessness, offered to accompany me on a short hike the next day. We walked the familiar trails, and he pointed out landmarks, sharing snippets of history and personal anecdotes. The forest, with its towering trees and the melodies of birds, felt welcoming again. As the days turned into weeks, the unease from the incident began to fade. Clara and George George became dear friends. They introduced me to many locals, and I became a part of their tight-knit community. What was supposed to be a brief respite became an extended stay. I eventually decided to settle down in the area, renting a small cabin not far from the lodge. I started offering guided hikes, emphasizing safety and preparedness. Clara and George's lodge became the starting point for many of these tours. The woods, once a place of fear, became my sanctuary again. Years passed, and life settled into a comfortable routine. Clara and George eventually passed on, leaving the lodge to me in their will. I continued their legacy, running the lodge and sharing tales of the forest's wonders and its occasional dangers with new generations of travelers. The incident with the fugitive became a distant memory, but the lessons it taught me remained. I always stressed to my guests the importance of being alert and aware, of respecting the woods, and of looking out for one another. Through it all, I realized that life's unexpected twists and turns could lead to profound transformations. From a solo backpacker seeking adventure to a guardian of the forest sharing its stories, my journey had come full circle. The woods, with their age-old wisdom, had shown me that even in our darkest moments, there's always a path leading to a new dawn. I've lived in a mid-sized city for most of my life, and while there are areas you want to avoid, especially after dark, I'd always felt pretty safe in my neighborhood. I had my routines, like my nightly jog after work, and everything was usually uneventful. That is until last summer. It was a balmy evening when I set out for my jog. I took my usual route, passing familiar houses, the corner deli, and making a turn at the small park. About 20 minutes into my run, I noticed a white van, seemingly nondescript, slowly driving by. The van itself wasn't particularly alarming. What struck me was its pacing. It seemed to be matching my jogging speed, which I brushed off as coincidental at first. By the time I made it to the other side of the park, the van had passed by me 3 times. A shiver of unease ran down my spine. Trying to dismiss it as paranoia, I decided to take a shortcut through a pedestrian alley that would lead me straight back home. The alley was fairly well lit, and I'd taken this route countless times before. As I entered, I took a quick glance behind me, spotting the van parked a short distance away. Quickening my pace, I tried to reassure myself. It was probably just someone making a delivery or waiting for someone, but a nagging feeling told me otherwise. Suddenly, I heard the sliding door of a vehicle opening, followed by hushed whispers and footsteps approaching. Panic surged through me, and I decided to make a run for it. The footsteps behind me grew louder and faster. I could hear at least 2 distinct sets of footsteps, indicating there were multiple people chasing me. Gasping for breath, my mind raced. Where could I go? I remembered my friend Lisa's apartment was nearby. She lived on the ground floor of a building just 2 blocks away. If I could make it there, I might be safe. Summoning every ounce of strength, I dashed towards her building, darting between cars and jumping over low fences. The footsteps seemed to be lagging behind, but I didn't dare look back. Reaching Lisa's building, I banged frantically on her window. Within moments, she opened it, a look of shock on her face. I clambered in, and we quickly locked all doors and windows. Peeking out from behind the curtains, we saw 2 men in dark clothing standing near the alley entrance, looking around. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they retreated, disappearing into the night. Shaken, I thanked Lisa profusely for letting me in. I called the police and reported the incident, providing as much detail as I could. The officers were sympathetic but stated that without more information, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols in the area. After that night, I changed my jogging routine. No more evening runs. I joined a local gym and kept my outdoor activities to broad daylight, but the feeling of being watched, of being targeted, lingered. I became more alert, more cautious. Several weeks later, while heading home from work, I spotted the same white van parked near my apartment building. My heart raced. Were they watching me? Were they waiting for another opportunity? Determined not to be a victim, I discreetly took a photo of the van, including its license plate, and sent it to the police. I also shared it with friends and family, urging them to be cautious. A few days later, I received a call from Officer Martinez, one of the officers I had spoken to previously. They had traced the van to a rental agency and, after some digging, had linked it to a series of robberies and assaults in neighboring cities. The individuals involved were known to stalk potential victims, learning their routines before making their move. The information was chilling, and while I was relieved that the police were making progress, the reality of the danger I had been in began to sink in. The following month, with the combined efforts of local law enforcement agencies, the men were apprehended in a nearby town. Apparently, they had been involved in a string of crimes, targeting lone individuals in various cities. The ordeal was a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of life. I had been one step away from becoming another statistic, mistake, another victim. But my instincts, combined with a bit of luck, had saved me. In the months that followed, I organized neighborhood watch groups and personal safety workshops. Lisa, who had been my refuge that terrifying night, joined me in these efforts. Together, we emphasized the significance of community, of looking out for one another. If I had been in that situation and hadn't known Lisa lived nearby, or if she hadn't been home, the outcome could have been drastically different. Local news outlets picked up on our efforts, and soon, our story was being used as a cautionary tale to remind people to be vigilant. Parents started having more in-depth conversations with their children about safety, friends developed systems to check in on one another, and many individuals took basic self-defense courses. But even with the increased community efforts, I still had moments of unease. Nightmares of the chase often haunted my sleep, and the sound of footsteps behind me, even in broad daylight, made me jump. It was clear that the trauma ran deeper than I had initially realized, so I started seeing a therapist. It was during these sessions that I truly began to process the events of that night. I had harbored a guilt, a what-if scenario where I believed I could have done something differently, could have avoided the whole situation altogether. But my therapist helped me see that I had done the best I could with the information I had at the time. I wasn't to blame for the actions of those men. They had made their choices, and I had made mine, choices that saved my life. Life has a way of moving on, even after the most harrowing experiences. But some scars remain, reminding us of battles fought and lessons learned. My encounter with the men in the white van was a wake-up call, urging me to prioritize my safety and the safety of those around me. One evening, while walking my rescue dog, Max, I passed by the same alley where the chase had taken place. For a moment, memories flooded back, causing my heartbeat to quicken, but then Max, sensing my distress, nuzzled his head against my hand, grounding me in the present. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of how far I'd come. While the world might be filled with uncertainties, I had taken control of my narrative. I had turned a traumatic event into an opportunity to grow, to educate, and to strengthen my community. That's the thing about life's challenges. They can break us, or they can propel us to become better versions of ourselves. And while I wish I had never had that encounter, I am proud of the person it has allowed me to become. To those reading this, always trust your gut, look out for one another, and remember, no matter how dark the situation may seem, there's always a chance to turn things around, to find hope, and to rebuild. It won't be easy, but with resilience and community support, it is entirely possible. To the men in the white van, let's never meet again, but thank you for showing me the strength I never knew I had. I've always been a bibliophile. Every town I visited, I made a point to check out the local bookstore. During my college years, I spent a summer in a small coastal town interning at a marine lab. The town was a serene, quiet place, the kind where neighbors still borrowed sugar from one another. One lazy Saturday, I decided to venture to the town's only bookstore. It was a quaint, two-storied building with the sweet aroma of old books filling the air. The moment I walked in, I felt a comforting stillness, accompanied by the distant sound of waves crashing on the shore. The elderly store owner gave me a kind nod from behind the counter, absorbed in his newspaper. I wandered through the narrow aisles, losing myself in the world of books. As time went on, I settled at a secluded corner with a pile of novels. Occasionally, I would hear footsteps or hushed conversations from other patrons, but I remained engrossed in my reading. It was when I was deeply engrossed in a novel that I felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the book's gripping plot. However, the sensation persisted. Glancing up, my eyes met those of a man standing a few aisles away. He was middle-aged, with unkempt hair and an ill-fitted brown jacket. Though he was pretending to scan the bookshelves, his eyes were firmly fixed on me. Feeling uneasy, I decided to shift my location, convincing myself that I was just being overly paranoid. I moved to the second floor, where there was a reading lounge overlooking the ocean. But not even 10 minutes later, I felt the weight of a gaze on me again. I wasn't surprised to find the same man, this time sitting on a couch across the room, a book on his lap, yet his attention solely on me. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I knew this wasn't mere coincidence. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to reveal that I was staying nearby. The last thing I wanted was this stranger following me home. Instead, I decided to confront him. I walked over, heart pounding, and asked, "Is there a reason you're watching me?" The man looked taken aback. I thought you looked familiar," he stammered, not meeting my gaze. "I don't believe we've met," I replied firmly. His continued gaze made my skin crawl. Just then, a couple entered the lounge, breaking the tense standoff. Seizing the moment, I quickly made my way downstairs and approached the store bookstore owner. I quietly explained the situation, and without hesitation, he offered to help. We're about to close. He announced loudly, ringing a bell on the counter. "Please make your way to the checkout." I watched from behind a bookshelf as the man in the brown jacket reluctantly made his way to the exit, casting one last lingering glance in my direction. The owner, Mr. Thompson, kindly offered to drive me home, even though it was just a few blocks away. I gratefully accepted, not wanting to risk a run-in with the stranger. As we drove, Mr. Thompson told me about the man. His name was Edward, a local who had grown increasingly unpredictable over the years. There had been whispers about him following young women, but nothing had ever been proven. The police had been involved once, but with no concrete evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I thanked Mr. Thompson profusely for his help. As I reached my front door, he said, "Always trust your instincts, young lady, and never be afraid to ask for help." The next few weeks went by without incident. I avoided the bookstore and made sure to always have someone accompany me whenever I went out. The incident had shaken me, but with the support of my new friends in the town, I slowly regained my confidence. Towards the end of my internship, a local news story sent shivers down my spine. Edward had been arrested. He was found in the basement of his home, surrounded by dozens of photos of various women from the town, all taken without their knowledge. Among the photos were several of me taken at the Marine Lab, the cafe, and chillingly right outside my residence. After that harrowing experience, I took a few months to gather myself. The trauma of what could have been haunted my nights, and I found it challenging to trust new faces, especially in unfamiliar places. Eventually, I went back to my college town to finish my studies. Surrounded by familiar faces and routines, I felt a semblance of normalcy returning, but as with all traumatic events, they sometimes follow you, even if just in your thoughts. To help cope, I joined a support group that focused on individuals who had faced stalking or had close encounters with potential predators. It was in this group that I met Lily, a vibrant woman a few years older than me who had endured a similar experience. She had been stalked by an ex-boyfriend for over a year before finally obtaining a restraining order. Lily and I bonded over our shared trauma and soon became close friends. Our friendship became a source of strength, allowing us both to face our fears and anxieties head-on. One evening, while sipping coffee in a local cafe, Lily shared an idea she'd been pondering. What if we turned our traumatic experiences into something positive? What if we started a program to educate young women about the signs of stalking and how to protect themselves? The idea resonated with me. We both knew that education and awareness could prevent others from facing what we had. With determination, we set out to create a program that would be integrated into the local colleges. We collaborated with local law enforcement, counselors, and even managed to get a few grants to help with the funding. Safe Steps was born, and we held workshops teaching students about the warning signs of stalking, the importance of listening to one's intuition, and practical steps to ensure personal safety. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many attendees shared their stories, revealing how common such experiences were and how vital a resource like Safe Steps was. One particular session stands out in my memory. A young woman approached me after a workshop, her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "I think I'm being followed." We immediately involved the campus police and connected her with resources to ensure her safety. Months turned into years, and Safe Steps grew beyond our wildest dreams. We expanded to other colleges and even high schools. The feeling of turning our trauma into a tool for empowerment was indescribable. Lily and I often reflected on our journey. From victims to advocates, we had come a long way. We had each other's backs and were determined to have the backs of countless others facing similar threats. Life moved on. I graduated, found a job, and even moved to a new city. But the mission of Safe Steps and the lessons from that small coastal town remained a significant part of my life. Every workshop, every shared story, and every person we helped reminded me of Mr. Thompson's words, "Always trust your instincts." I often wonder what would have happened if I hadn't listened to that gut feeling in the bookstore. It's a chilling thought, but it reaffirms the importance of intuition and the need for resources like Safe Steps. The world is full of uncertainties, and danger sometimes lurks where we least expect it. But with awareness, community support, and a bit of courage, we can navigate it safely, turning traumatic experiences into tales of resilience and hope. The old downtown library was my refuge during my undergraduate days. Tucked between newer, more modern structures, it had that ancient book smell, creaking wooden floors, and ornate iron wrought stairs that led to a second floor with rows upon rows of tall wooden bookshelves. My usual spot was a table near a window on the second floor. The spot was quiet, tucked away behind a large bookshelf, and bathed in soft sunlight. Studying there always felt peaceful. About 6 months into my routine, I began to notice a man who seemed to frequent the library as much as I did. He was in his late 50s, almost always impeccably dressed in a beige trench coat with a trilby hat that he would hang on the coat rack at the entrance. At first, I paid him little mind. He would sit a few tables away from me, engrossed in large, dusty books. But as weeks went by, I began to notice him glancing in my direction more frequently. When our eyes met, he'd quickly look away. Initially, I brushed it off as coincidence, but the frequency of his glances grew, making me increasingly uncomfortable. One evening, as the library's closing time approached, I packed up my stuff and headed for the stairs. I could hear footsteps echoing behind me. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the man in the trench coat following me. Alarm bells started ringing in my head. Reaching the main floor, I decided to test if he was indeed following me. Instead of heading for the exit, I went to the restroom corridor. As expected, he pretended to browse a nearby shelf, occasionally peering towards the corridor, waiting. After several minutes, I emerged, and without making eye contact, briskly headed for the exit. The library's old main doors led directly outside, and as I pushed them open, I realized it was already dark. The closest bus stop was 3 blocks away. Taking a deep breath, I started walking. The streetlights provided some illumination, but the shadows between them were dark and vast. Footsteps echoed behind me. Too scared to look back, I picked up my pace, my heels clicking frantically against the pavement. 2 blocks later, I dared to glance backward. He was closer, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat, but the intent in his eyes unmistakable. Panic sudden. My bus stop was up ahead, but there was no bus in sight. Then, an idea struck. To my left was a small, usually busy Italian cafe. Hoping it was still open, I made a beeline for it. Pushing through its doors, I almost collapsed in relief. The place was bustling with customers. I quickly found a seat near a window and tried to calm my racing heart. A few minutes later, he appeared outside the cafe, scanning the inside. Our eyes met, and I felt a chill run down my spine. He stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then, as if deciding against something, he slowly walked away. I stayed in the cafe for nearly an hour, even after my pasta arrived, barely touching the food. When I finally mustered the courage to leave, the cafe owner, an elderly Italian man, offered to have one of his waiters walk me to the bus stop. I gratefully accepted. The next day, I reported the incident to the library administration and gave a description of the man. They promised to keep an eye out, but without any tangible proof, there was little they could do. From that day on, my beloved second floor spot was abandoned. Instead, I opted to sit closer to the main entrance with more people around. I also changed my study hours, ensuring I left the library well before sunset. A few weeks later, the head librarian called me into her office. The man had been banned from the library. While they couldn't tie him directly to my incident, they had caught him on a surveillance camera, hiding a small camera underneath the study table. It was chilling to think about his intentions. Several months passed since the incident, and life resumed its usual rhythm. My memory of the trench coat man became a faded silhouette, replaced by the hustle of final exams and college applications. But occasionally, when dusk approached, and I found myself on the streets, the pulse in my temples would quicken, a residue of that harrowing encounter. One evening, while out with friends at a local diner, our laughter was interrupted by the news playing on the mounted TV. An older man had been arrested for stalking and attempting to kidnap a young woman. The police suspected there might be other victims and were urging people to come forward with any information. The still image they provided made my blood run cold. It was the trench coat man, looking as cold and haunting as I remembered. I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief because he was behind bars, unable to harm anyone for now, and anger because I hadn't taken more aggressive action earlier, which might have prevented him from continuing his predatory behavior. The following week, I visited the local police station to provide a statement about my encounter with the man. The detective I spoke to was kind and understanding. He informed me that this individual had a history of troubling behavior, with some incidents dating back over a decade. More victims began coming forward, stories that painted a pattern: a man lurking in libraries, cafes, and parks, always watching, always waiting. Some accounts were eerily similar to mine, while others took even darker turns. With the collective accounts, the police built a robust case against him. The man was charged with several crimes, including stalking, attempted kidnapping, and invasion of privacy. Months later, as I packed my bags for graduate school in a different state, I came across a newspaper clipping about his trial and conviction. The man would spend the rest of his life in prison. Life moved on, but the lessons from that chapter stuck with me. I became an advocate for personal safety, organizing workshops in my graduate school and later in my community. It was my way of transforming a traumatic event into a force for positive change. I was also deeply touched by the outpouring of support from strangers. The Let's Not Meet community, where I had shared my story, had rallied around me. Their messages of support and hearing their own stories had been therapeutic. The world was filled with both light and shadows. My encounter with the trench coat man had introduced me to its darker corners, but by sharing my story, I also discovered its inherent goodness. In unity and community, and in the shared purpose of looking out for one another, I found found hope and healing. That old downtown library, with its creaking floors and ancient books, had once been my sanctuary. Even though I never returned to my spot near the window on the second floor, the library remained a testament to my resilience. A reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, strength can emerge. And while I would always carry the scar of that encounter, it would never define me. In the tapestry of life, some threads are darker than others, but they all weave together to create our unique story. Mine was one of survival, growth, and ultimately empowerment. The town I grew up in was quiet and uneventful, nestled amidst vast stretches of farmland. This made my choice to pursue a career in photography a bit ironic. What could one possibly capture in such a mundane setting? The answer was everything if you knew where to look. One summer evening, at 19, I decided to capture some night shots. The stillness of the night, with its inky black skies, speckled with stars, always mesmerized me. Equipped with my new DSLR and tripod, I set out around 10 p.m. An hour to my shoot, I was near an old, abandoned farmhouse that had always been a source of local legends. Some said it was haunted, while others spoke of it being the site of old prohibition transactions. However, most of these stories were embellished tales to scare youngsters. Positioning my camera to capture the skeletal silhouette of the farmhouse against the moonlit sky, I began adjusting my settings. Just as I was about to take a shot, I noticed a flicker in one of the farmhouse's broken windows. Dismissing it as a trick of the light, I refocused and clicked the shutter. As the flash illuminated the surroundings, I caught a fleeting glimpse of a face in the window, a man with wild hair staring intently at me. I blinked, startled, my heart pounding. I looked again, but the window was empty. It's just your imagination, I whispered to myself, attributing it to the plethora of ghost stories I had heard. Shaking off the unease, I decided to move closer and take some shots inside the farmhouse. As I approached, the air grew colder, sending shivers down my spine. I told myself it was the draft and nothing more. Stepping inside, the dilapidated interior bore signs of age and decay. The wallpaper peeled off in chunks, the wooden floorboards creaked, and the air was thick with a musty odor. I set up my camera in what looked like the main hall, with a grand staircase serving as my focal point. Click, flash. When the flash cleared, I saw him, the man from the window, standing atop the staircase, a chilling grin on his face. Dropping my camera, I bolted out the front door without looking back. I sprinted through the fields, my breath ragged, the darkness amplifying every rustle and whisper of the wind. It felt like a nightmare, the kind where your feet feel heavy and the danger behind you inches closer and closer. When I reached the main road, I flagged down a passing car. The elderly driver, Mr. Perkins, a local I recognized, was shocked to see me in such a state. Between gasps, I relayed my encounter at the farmhouse. He drove me home, a grave expression on his face. Once we reached my house, he turned off the engine and sighed, "Son, what you saw wasn't a ghost, but something much more sinister." He shared a story from years ago when he was a young man. There was a recluse named Elijah who lived in that farmhouse. He was eccentric, always capturing animals and taking photographs of them. As years passed, rumors spread about his sanity deteriorating, progressing from animals to capturing and photographing wandering travelers. One day, he simply disappeared, leaving behind only whispers of his unsettling activities. The local police investigated after a few hikers went missing near the area, but they found nothing to directly implicate him. However, they discovered a hidden room filled with photographs, portraits of people, terror evident in their eyes, as if they were trapped or begging for release. No one knew what happened to those people or to Elijah. The story spread like wildfire among my friends and neighbors, with some being genuinely concerned, while others brushed it off, thinking I had let my imagination get the best of me. Soon, the tale reached the ears of local journalists, and I was approached for an interview. Although hesitant at first, I finally decided to share my story, hoping that it might deter others from venturing into potentially dangerous areas. The day after the article was published, a historian named Clara reached out to me. She said she had been researching the history of our town and the farmhouse in particular. She had uncovered a series of newspaper clippings and journal entries from the time Elijah was said to have lived there. Clara believed that there was more to the story than just myths and wanted to uncover the truth. We met at a local cafe where she spread out her findings on the table. Together, we pored over them, connecting the dots. The clippings revealed numerous missing person reports from the years Elijah lived in the farmhouse. Additionally, a diary entry from a local woman in that era detailed how her husband had ventured near the farmhouse and had never returned. She wrote of her grief and the eerie feeling she got whenever she passed by the property, convinced that her beloved was still there, somewhere. Armed with this newfound information, Clara and I decided to approach the police. We felt there was enough evidence to warrant a deeper investigation into the property, especially given my recent experience. The authorities were initially skeptical but agreed to inspect the farmhouse once more, this time with more thoroughness. The search was intense and lasted for days. And then, in the basement, behind a concealed wall, they made a grim discovery: a makeshift darkroom. Old photographs, some decayed with age, lined the walls. Each portrayed a terrified individual, their eyes reflecting sheer horror. Among the photographs were tools, ropes, and other instruments suggesting restraint and potential harm. The most haunting discovery was a series of journals, presumably written by Elijah himself. They detailed his descent into madness, his obsession with capturing the essence of fear in his photographs, and his belief that by doing so, he could gain immortality. DNA tests on some of the remains matched them with long-lost citizens of the town. The community was shaken to its core. A vigil was held for the victims, and the farmhouse was subsequently sealed off, with plans to demolish it. Clara and I formed a bond during this journey, connected by our shared mission to uncover the truth. She eventually published her research, shedding light on a dark chapter of our town's history. As for me, the experience gave my life a new direction. I became involved in community activities, advocating for safety and awareness. I also organized photography workshops, emphasizing the power of the medium but also teaching young enthusiasts about the ethics and responsibilities that come with it. The farmhouse's legend became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the past, and while the building itself was reduced to rubble, the memories lingered. Elijah's quest for immortality, in a way, was achieved, not through his disturbing photographs, but through the stories that passed from generation to generation, a testament to the evils man can commit. And though I had once wished to never meet him again, in the end, it was that chilling encounter that reshaped my life, making me more vigilant, grounded, and appreciative of the world around me. It was the summer after my freshman year of college, and I landed an internship at a prominent tech company in the city. It was an exciting, bustling time. The company's building was located in an older, industrial part of town which had seen recent gentrification. Quaint coffee shops had sprouted alongside decades-old warehouses. There was one particular route I used to take from the subway to my office. It was through a narrow alleyway which saved me about 10 minutes every morning. Though it was slightly dim due to the tall buildings blocking sunlight, I never thought twice about it. One Wednesday morning, I noticed something unusual. A man in a business suit was standing in the alley, talking animatedly on his phone. This wouldn't have been odd except he was always there, every day, at the same time, in the same spot, and always talking on his phone. Initially, I brushed it off thinking he probably had regular calls and preferred to take them outside the office. 2 weeks into my noticing him, things took a strange turn. He started acknowledging me, a slight nod one day, a wave the next. By the end of the week, he'd greet me with a good morning or comment about the weather. I responded out of politeness. On one fateful day, as I was walking through the alley, he stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Hi, we always seem to run into each other, don't we? I'm David." Unnerved but not wanting to be rude, I introduced myself. We had a brief conversation, and he mentioned he worked for a startup in one of the neighboring buildings. It all seemed benign. We parted ways, and I felt silly for being on edge. However, the interactions began to escalate. Sometimes David would be waiting with a coffee, insisting I take it. Other times he'd walk with me to my building, talking about his startup. It was all very cordial, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. Then one evening, after working late, I was walking to the subway when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was David, but he wasn't in his usual suit. He was wearing casual clothes and had a scruffy appearance, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His demeanor had shifted. He seemed frantic. "Where were you? I waited for you this morning, and you didn't pass by." His voice had an accusing tone. Taken aback, I stammered, I took a different route today." He looked me in the eyes, his gaze piercing. "I don't like when things change," he whispered. Terrified, I quickly excused myself and hurried to the subway. I was shaken. The next day, I told my colleagues about David. One of them, Mark, looked puzzled and said, "That's strange. I know almost everyone in the startups around here, but I've never heard of a David." Disturbed, I decided to avoid the alleyway and take the longer route. I also informed building security about my encounters. A week later, as I was leaving the office, one of the security personnel, Mr. Thompson, approached me. "You're the young lady who mentioned the man named David, right?" Nodding, I replied, "Yes, why?" He hesitated. "Well, we reviewed the security footage. There's no David entering or exiting any building nearby. In fact, the only time he appears is in the alley when you pass by. Then, he simply walks away, disappearing around the corner." I was stunned. Who was this man? Why was he so obsessed with me? My anxiety peaked, so I decided to involve the police. They took my statement and decided to stake out the alleyway. For days, David was nowhere in sight, and I started to feel like I'd overreacted. Then, late one night, My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and a familiar voice whispered, "I miss our morning chats." I hung up, panicked. The police traced the call to a disposable phone. Over the next days, I received multiple texts and calls, each more desperate and unnerving. The breaking point was a letter left at my office. Inside were photos of me going to my apartment, at a cafe with friends, even from my college days. The message read, "You can change your route, but you can't escape our connection." The police intensified their investigation and discovered David's real identity. His name was Eric, and he had a history of stalking. He'd become fixated on people he felt a connection with. There were restraining orders against him from 2 other women in different cities. They finally caught Eric lurking near my apartment one night. He had been watching me, tracking my movements for months, even before our alleyway encounters. After the arrest, life began to return to normal. Days turned into weeks and my heart would still race every time I passed the cafe or crossed that particular street on my way home. I would double check my locks, be wary of unknown numbers, and became increasingly more isolated, fearing David was around any corner. Work became my solace, a place I felt somewhat safe, especially with coworkers like Mark who were always ready to support me. One day, Mark approached me with an idea. "Have you ever considered self-defense classes?" My sister took some after a break-in at her apartment, said it changed her life, made her feel empowered. I hesitated. The idea of stepping out of my comfort zone was daunting. However, after some thought, I decided it was worth a try. Mark's sister, Lisa, recommended a place, and soon I found myself in a dojo with other women, some of whom had similar stories to share. As the weeks passed, I started feeling stronger. My posture changed, my steps became more confident, and I felt less vulnerable. It wasn't just about the physical techniques I learned, but the emotional healing the classes brought. It was a community where everyone supported one another. One evening, after an intense session, Lisa introduced me to Anna, a detective who attended classes to stay in shape. Anna and I hit it off, and over coffee, I shared my ordeal. She listened patiently, and then said something I hadn't expected. "Have you ever thought of turning your experience into something proactive? Perhaps work with the police in raising awareness about stalking and personal safety?" I mulled over Anna's words for days. The idea was tempting but terrifying. Would I be able to face an audience, reliving the memories, sharing the fear? But then, I thought of the countless others who might be in the same situation, unsure of how to handle it. Maybe my story could help. With Anna's guidance, I began collaborating with the local police department. We organized community events, workshops, and school sessions. Anna shared safety tips and legal steps one could take, while I spoke of my experience, the signs, and the importance of seeking help. Mark was my pillar throughout. He'd attend every workshop, standing at the back, his presence a comforting reminder of the good people in the world. Over time, the workshops gained momentum. Other victims came forward, sharing their stories, and our initiative expanded. Local newspapers and TV channels covered our sessions, leading to a surge in community participation. One day, during a workshop at a college, a young woman approached me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Your story saved me," she whispered. "I realized my ex-boyfriend's behavior wasn't normal. Because of your workshop, I knew the steps to take. Thank you." It was moments like these that made everything worthwhile. David's shadow began to fade from my life. While the trauma didn't disappear overnight, channeling my energy into helping others acted as a balm. It was therapeutic, giving me purpose and direction. Years passed. Mark and I, bound by a deep friendship, began dating. Our bond, forged in adversity, was unbreakable. We eventually married and started a nonprofit dedicated to personal safety and awareness. The girl who had once been paralyzed by fear now stood in front of hundreds, turning her pain into a mission. David had intended to break me, to make me feel weak. Instead, he inadvertently pushed me onto a path of strength, resilience, and purpose. It started innocently enough. I began receiving a series of misdirected text messages from an unknown number. They'd often read, "Hey, it's Simon. Did you grab the stuff for Saturday's party?" Or, "Simon, you owe me for last night's dinner." The problem was, my name wasn't Simon. After the third message, I replied, "Wrong number. I'm not Simon." Almost instantly, the unknown number replied, "Oh, my bad. Sorry. I thought that would be the end of it." But then, I received another message from the same number, just curious, who am I texting? Against my better judgment, I answered, "My name's Alex." "Nice to meet you, Alex. I'm Rebecca." We exchanged a few pleasantries and soon began chatting frequently. I learned Rebecca was in her late 20s and worked in advertising. Our conversations were light and fun, a pleasant distraction from my mundane work routine. But things took a strange turn about 2 weeks into our correspondence. I received a message from Rebecca late one evening. "Hey, Simon showed me a picture of you. You're cute. Why didn't you tell me you were so good looking?" My stomach dropped. I had never sent a photo to Rebecca, nor had I shared shared any personal information. Rebecca, I never sent Simon any picture. I don't even know who Simon is. She replied, LOL, don't be shy. Anyway, Simon says he knows you. Smile world. Hey, I was growing uneasy. Rebecca, I have no clue who Simon is. Please ask him how he knows me. She took a while to respond. He says you both went to college together. University of Portland. I was taken aback. Yes, I did, but I can't recall any Simon from my time there. Our conversations dwindled after that. Her previously rapid-fire replies became sporadic, and I assumed she was probably embarrassed by the mix-up. But the eeriness of the situation stuck with me. One evening, as I was leaving work, I noticed a black sedan parked across the street. It was oddly familiar. It was there the next day, and the day after. The same pattern persisted. Every time I looked out of my office window or left the building, that black sedan was there, seemingly waiting. Paranoia began to set in. I decided to confront the driver. As I approached the vehicle, the windows rolled down, revealing none other than Simon. I recognized him immediately. We had indeed gone to college together, but weren't exactly friends. Simon was 2 years my senior and had an unsettling reputation for being intense and aggressive. The reason he wasn't on my radar was that I had tried my best to avoid him. Simon smirked. Hey, Alex, remember me? I tried to keep my voice steady. Yeah, from college. What are you doing here? He chuckled. Just wanted to catch up. You know, old times. His demeanor was off-putting, and my instincts were screaming at me to leave. Look, Simon, I'm busy. Maybe some other time. He didn't respond, just watched me with those cold, unblinking eyes. I turned away and tried to put the unnerving encounter out of my mind. Days turned into weeks, but Simon's presence became even more palpable. He was either trailing me, parked near my apartment, or just happened to be at the same place as I was. It felt like I was losing my mind. One evening, I returned home to find my apartment ransacked. Nothing valuable was stolen, but personal items were shuffled, pictures were turned upside down, and my photo albums were scattered everywhere. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The police were involved, but there was no concrete evidence pointing to Simon. With no signs of forced entry, they speculated I might have forgotten to lock up, and someone took the opportunity to snoop. But deep down, I knew it was Simon. The turning point came one Friday night. I was staying late at work, and the building was nearly deserted. My phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was Rebecca. Simon's here. At your office. He's looking for you. My heart raced. How did Simon know I was still at work, and why was Rebecca within? I locked my office door and immediately called the police. As I waited, huddled behind my desk, I could hear footsteps echoing in the hallway outside, growing closer and closer. I held my breath, praying they'd pass by. Suddenly, my office door handle jiggled. Someone was trying to get in. The jiggling grew more aggressive, turning into violent shaking. Just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. Minutes felt like hours, but soon, I heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief washed over me. The police apprehended Simon that night, right outside my building. They found lock-picking tools on him and chillingly pictures of me from college, from my daily life, from inside my apartment. Rebecca, it turned out, was an innocent party. She had run into Simon at a mutual event, and he recognized me from her chat when he borrowed her phone. It was he who had sent that warning message from her phone when she stepped away, likely as some twisted game. With the evidence against him, Simon was taken into custody and slapped with a restraining order. I later learned from mutual acquaintances that he had been dealing with a series of personal and mental health issues since college. His obsession with me was an unfortunate consequence of those struggles, though no one could explain why he had fixated on me specifically. Rebecca and I met face to face after the whole ordeal. She was genuinely apologetic, feeling responsible for inadvertently dragging me into this mess. We both attended a few therapy sessions together to cope with the trauma. Over time, we built a genuine friendship grounded in our shared experience. The next few months were a whirlwind of counseling, dealing with the legalities, and trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. While the physical reminders of Simon's obsession faded, the moved belongings, the rearranged photos, the psychological scars lingered. I'd jump at shadows, double and triple check my locks, and constantly look over my shoulder. However, life has a way of marching on. The incident, terrifying as it was, began to retreat into the annals of my memory. I moved apartments, switched jobs, and even took a sabbatical to travel for a few months. One evening, on the streets of Prague, I was admiring the beauty of Charles Bridge when a familiar voice greeted me. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to see a smiley Rebecca, camera in hand, capturing the sunset over the Vltava River. It was an unexpected reunion, thousands of miles away from where our twisted tale had had begun. We spent the evening reminiscing, catching up, and inevitably discussing the ordeal with Simon. It turned out that he was institutionalized, receiving the help he so desperately needed. Both Rebecca and I had grown from the experience. We learned about the fragility of the mind, the importance of vigilance, and the bonds that can form from shared trauma. As we parted ways, she said something that stayed with me. Life is a series of interwoven stories, some dark, some light, but it's up to us to decide which chapters define us. That night in Prague, standing on a bridge steeped in history and surrounded by tales of love, loss, and legends, I realized that every experience, no matter how dark, contributes to our story. And while we can't control every event that befalls us, we can control the narrative. My story with Simon was a chapter, a dark, harrowing chapter, but just a chapter nonetheless. The book would still be written, and I had many more stories to tell. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.